this is using evidence. So far we have established what our purpose is. You've established what your thesis statement is or your propositional claim. And now you need to think about, all right, well, I want to persuade my audience to do this. How am I going to get there? And this is where evidence becomes incredibly crucial in developing your argument. And there are several ways that you can come to a conclusion based on your evidence. The first is going to be using the process of deduction. Now, this is reasoning from general truth to specific situations, right? So think about it, the process of deduction, the process of reasoning why somebody should be agreeing with you, and you use evidence to support that. And syllogism is usually the most common form of deduction. And it's just simply a formula of deductive reasoning, and it includes a major premise, a minor, and a conclusion. Now, your premises must be true for this method of reasoning to work. And so basically, you can't just make up a fake argument and expect your conclusion to come out correct. All right? Because people are going to nab you on that. And so your evidence needs to be solid, and it also needs to be correct, and it needs to be supported. So an example of a wrong way of using deduction here is you have your major premise, such as all senior class members are lazy. Your minor premise would be Matt is a senior, and your conclusion is Matt is a senior, therefore he's lazy. All right, that's just completely ridiculous because there's no evidence to support it. So you're making up these premises that are entirely wrong from the onset, and you're making a very generalized statement that is incredibly wrong. So let's keep going. So sometimes even with right premises, guys, you can still be wrong. And so that just requires, you have to think about your conclusion while you're in this process of deduction. And so an example of this would be your major premise, all men are mortal. Your minor premise, Jesus is a man, and therefore Jesus is mortal. All right. Now, why is this conclusion wrong? Jesus was fully man, but he was also fully God, right? And so there's something to be said about making sure that your information is correct. So you need to make sure that you watch your wording. I've said this before in the previous videos that whenever it comes to persuasive speaking, wording is incredibly important, and really I can't emphasize that enough. Just because if you want to persuade somebody, you have to have all the elements, and your language has to be not necessarily like aggressively forceful, but it does require a lot of tact and planning. So watch your wording, make sure your premises are solid, right? And I'm giving you an example here, but for the sake of time, we're just going to kind of go past that. Before I move forward, though, biggest thing is your deduction, guys. If it's going to be correct, it needs to be based off of study, research, and actual evidence. All right. I love you guys dearly, but if all you're giving is your opinion and it's non-research supported, then all it is just opinion, and that's not going to be enough to persuade your audience. So make sure that you have evidence to give you credibility, so that you have a more higher chance of getting your audience to at least move in your direction and buying into whatever it is that you're wanting them to buy into. So don't be this person who gets eaten alive by their audience because you haven't been doing the research that you need. So your talking points need to be correct, and they need to be well researched, or your audience is going to nitpick you on that. Just like, you have the big thing that has become huge with our political candidates and everything, and fact check. you don't want to get fact checked and be proven to be wrong. You want to make sure that everything that you do is solid. All right, so opposite of deduction whenever it comes to this process of reasoning is induction. Now, whereas deduction went from general to specific, induction goes from specific instances, I use specific instances to come to a generalized conclusion. And so, you know, so while deduction will make certain statements, inductions are not certain or tentative. All right. So whenever it comes to this process of inductions, with deduction, we had syllogism. With induction, you're looking for specific things. And so you're going to rely on examples, analogies, signs, and causation as your starting points. So deductions would have been a general, you would have been working for that general conclusion. This one is specific. All right, so what is an example? Obviously, guys, reasoning from an example draws a conclusion about an entire group based on a few examples from that group. So you're thinking specific and you're getting more general, more broad in the direction that your reasoning is moving. So an example of this would be X% of all Americans favor Donald Trump as president. Well, here's the thing is how do they know this? Did they survey everyone in the U.S.? No, I don't remember being surveyed on whether I agreed or whether I favored Trump as president. I never once was surveyed. So whenever it comes to the whole entire population and everything, you have to be careful about the information, the examples that you use to make sure that it's reliable. And so what probably happened here, and this is where you have to be really tactful as far as what you're choosing as your evidence, is you have to ask yourself, okay, well, who did they question? If they're just asking for a specific group of people what they think, then obviously it's going to be incredibly biased. All right? So, and then they make their assumption based off of that population. And so you have to think, okay, well, who is included in that population? How do they represent the entirety of the U.S.? And so because that's going to really inform whether that statistic is reliable or not, and whether you can actually make a conclusion based off of that specific information. All right, another form of induction is an analogy. And this is reasoning from compared circumstances. So two things may be alike in many ways, so you conclude that they are alike in others. So because they have this in common, they must also have these other things in common. So an example of that would be electricity gives off sparks. Well, lightning looks a lot like sparks, right? So perhaps lightning is a form of electricity. And another is a sign, and this is reasoning that enough evidence proves a conclusion. And this is probably the most common form that you will see used by lawyers, so those in the legal field. So an example of this would be someone died, but no one saw the murder. All right, so they would look for signs. So the lawyer will use circumstantial evidence or signs to build their case. So, for example, the suspect was found with a gun. They used the same, the same bullets used. They used the same gun. The suspect have powder burns on their hands. For example, one thing is all right. Well, when you go through an airport and everything, they pick up on gunpowder and everything, and they'll swab your hands. And if you fired a gun in, say the past 24 hours, they'll probably have to pat you down or do some testing on you before they allow you to proceed into the airport. And so there's just that type of evidence is incredibly important to building your case. And so in this case, because the suspect was found with a gun and and this gun had obviously the same type of bullets used in the murder, and the suspect had fired a weapon recently, then that's very incriminating. But all of that is circumstantial evidence or signs. And the conclusion that they form is that because of all of this evidence, the suspect must have murdered the victim. The next is cause and effect. And this is reasoning based on specific actions consistently producing specific results and therefore being causes of those results. And you do see this a lot in whenever it comes to your persuasive speaking. And the biggest thing that you have to work on this if you're going to use this method is balance. We'll go into that in a little bit. So here's the thing whenever it comes to this approach. There are two particular fallacies that you can become susceptible to if you're going to use this. The first is to assume that just because one thing followed another, that the first thing is the cause of the other. And so, for example, we planned a bonfire on Saturday. That's why it rained. I mean, we use that all the time. We're just like, oh, well, it just figures because of this happened. Well, this is faulty because obviously the bonfire did not cause the rain. And you can get other things in there like, superstition and things like that. Well, I didn't wear these socks to this game, so we lost the game. It's just a fallacy that uses the cause and effect reasoning. That's just it's not reliable. And it just doesn't make sense. You wearing your socks did not cause the game to go up in the air, or in this case, a bonfire obviously cannot cause rain. A second one is assuming that the cause when other things actually contributed as much or more. So, for example, assuming that stress gave you acne, well, obviously that does severely impact it. But if your diet has been no bueno and has been really bad, then that's also a huge contributor. And so it's just making sure that, all right, well, what is your reasoning? Is it verified? What elements of evidence are you using of induction to support your conclusion? That type of thing. So be careful of these two fallacies. All right, and next we'll be